welcome. Hello, welcome. We're testing how the mics feel. Can you all hear me? It's so nice to see you all. Hello. Happy Valentine's Day. In the spirit of love, we love seeing all of you. Joel would have loved seeing all of you. We're really glad that you're here. I have a little bit of opening bits to make sure that we feel like we're in the space. My name is Samara. I was Joel's daughter. I remain Joel's daughter. And we're going to hear from Nancy and then two of Joel's collaborators, Sandy and Doug, and then I'll say a few words, and then we're going to open this up to those of you who want to speak. So a few things as we situate in the space. Does everybody here know who they're sitting next to? Shall we take a moment and introduce yourself, say your name and how you know Joel? So now that you have connected with the people around you, you all have a little bit of a job for each other, which is that we're not taking an official break during this event. So if you need to go to the restroom, the people around you are going to have to help you just slide out. There are some right in the back, women's and men's, and then downstairs and also on the outside of the building where the reception is. And while we're talking about bodily fluids, there's also tissues around, and the people who have them under your seat, I designate you as the person to be particularly cognizant of sniffles that you hear around you and perhaps offer a tissue. Yes? So with that, I just have 3 pop-up rules I want to offer to just set us in this space. A pop-up rule means that it just exists while we're here together, and then it goes away. Oh, the image. Oh, can we get the image back up? Thank you. Yes, I should say also we're going to ding the chime to change the... Lovely. So actually, let me do that. That's us. My favorite picture of Joel and me. 3 rules for while we're in this space together. And by rules, I mean common agreements to set the intention in the space, yes? Rule number 1, bring joy in. Of course, there are reasons that this is a sad event, but we really, really want to acknowledge that this is a celebration. And not just that, but I find that the first image that comes to mind when I think of Joel is like, has anyone seen this? When he would raise his eyebrow and kind of go like this. So that's the energy. That's rule number 1, bring joy in. Rule number 2, grief is also present. And grief, I think, is the human emotion equivalent of dark matter. Because it's everywhere. And we don't always see its, we can't always detect it, but we see its effects. How was that? Thank you. Okay, and third and finally, your voice matters in this space, right? It is a celebration of Joel. It is also a celebration of us as our lives converged with his and as we sit here now in his absence. So as I invite those of you who want to speak up after we've done some speeches, do consider, really, your voice matters here, and whether you tell a silly story or your voice is a little shaky or you're not sure where you're going, please invite yourself to offer something. It can be short. Brevity is the soul of wit. But please feel free to invite yourself up and say something. And with that, I'm going to offer a few quotes that we got from lovely folks who are not here today, but who wrote us, and we just felt like we needed to share them. David Elbaz wrote, "Joel embodied intelligence, passion, and finesse of mind. He was my friend, my superhero friend, whose intelligence was unlimited, whose memory was encyclopedic, whose passion for knowledge was infinite. He embodied," get ready, "the very best that 14 billion years of evolution could achieve." This, he says, is a real tsunami for our world of astrophysics. I can't even imagine the world without Joel. It is as if the entire planet shrank suddenly. Prochaska wrote, "Joel's the only person I know to record a perfect score on the physics GRE, or the only person I know who did it and had the personality to tell you." John Hart, from the great class of 1966, said, "Joel was a giant within our class and beyond. His commitment to the common welfare was outstanding, and coming from a scientist of his rank, unique and inspiring. I was a backbencher," he says, "in the Physics 105/106 course taught by Professor Wheeler. Joel was always a step or two or three ahead of most of the rest of us." Roald Hoffman, Nobel Prize in Chemistry, said, "Joel was a force and a positive world-building one in science." And Joyce Kobayashi, who knew Joel at Stanford when he was getting his PhD, said, "It was a privilege and an experience to have known Joel. Although the span of our friendship and work together was for less than 2 years, memories of those times remain among my fondest. It was not only great fun to work with him and to get to know him as a friend, he also had a significant impact on the person I am today. I join the many of those, many whose lives were made more meaningful for having known Joel. The clarity of his thought and the integrity of his intent inevitably inspired others, as he was ethical to the core, and his indomitable spirit bolstered a commitment in everyone who worked with him to remain joyful and forward-looking. May we all honor his intention and uphold that commitment." So I'm going to now introduce my mom, Nancy, who, of course, needs no introduction. However, I will tell a little story that you don't know. When she and my dad first met, which was an extremely unlikely tale she will tell you more about, they got married and moved to campus at UCSC, and they lived in a little cabin with glass, and through the glass they could see the deer and a family of quail. And my parents were still getting to know each other because it was the early days of their courtship and marriage. And they just kept thinking, wow, like, how did we find each other? Wow. And you know that phrase, like the softer the better, the quicker the better? They had this saying that emerged during that era, the better, the better. And I have it on this necklace. It says on one side, the better, and on the other side, the better. And apparently this is the only necklace Joel ever wore for a very short time. And Nancy says, it was the 70s. But you know, I started wearing it. She gave it to me years ago, but I just picked it up without even understanding the story when we found out that his cancer had metastasized. And I haven't taken it off since. And I just love it, and I love them, and I love her. Mom.
Is the screen, yeah? Okay, this is just in case. Can you hear me if I don't hold that other one? Okay, good. So We're not here to mourn Joel. We're really here to celebrate his life. Joel survived an almost miraculous 8 years with pancreatic cancer, thanks to an experimental drug, but nothing works forever. Joel was a scientist from earliest childhood. He grew up in Butte, Montana, where it was freezing and his family didn't have TV, so he read all the time, and because he had a photographic memory, he remembered everything and insisted on telling everyone about it. His family called him Mr. Encyclopedia. They joked that he was born not with a silver spoon in his mouth, but with a phonograph needle. He told me that one day when he was about 6, he was waiting in a store with his mother, and he was bored. Then he noticed on his heavy winter jacket these little barrel-shaped buttons that fit into loops. And as he was playing with them, a thought occurred to him that changed his life forever. He realized that he never needed to be bored again. All he had to do was notice things. And he never was bored again. I have never seen Joel bored. So let me see. That's Joel at 6. There he is with his little Joel t-shirt. So I'm a songwriter, and part of this eulogy is going to be 2 songs I wrote about Joel, one at the beginning and one at the end. This first one I wrote 30 years ago, and this was Joel then. Nope, that's not it. That's Joel at his Princeton graduation with his mother and father on the right and his uncle and aunt on the left. But there he is, yeah, at his graduation. Let's go one more. That's Joel. That was Joel when I wrote this song. So let's play the song.
First time I saw you, you were talking. People paid attention when you spoke, but more than your words, goodness was what I heard, shining like a galaxy, solid as an oak. All the reasons I loved you that day, all the reasons I chose to stay, all the reasons I traveled so far, pale before the knowledge of what you truly are. You have my heart. You get my time. You have a big piece of my faith. You are a diamond mine. You are a diamond mine. It's decades now we've been together, and in the good, pain has been interspersed. But I'm not keeping score. With you I'm never bored. More than love and laughter, you expand my universe. Seeker of truth, believer in none, sharper than a laser, childlike in fun. After all these years together, who'd a brand new way with you. You have my heart. You get my time. You have a big piece of my faith. You are a diamond mine. You are a diamond mine. You are my diamond mine.
For Joel, science was more than a vocation. It was his spiritual practice. He didn't actually say this, he just lived it. It was his way not only of looking at reality, but of caring about it. He had an insatiable hunger to know and understand, a lifelong drive to use scientific knowledge for good, and optimism that it was possible. When we were clearing out his mother's apartment after her death, we found in a rusty cookie tin the handwritten text of Joel's bar mitzvah speech when he was 13. It was a plea for scientists to be socially responsible. But in some ways, Joel was socially clueless. I was not planning to tell the story of how we met, but Samara said I should, and I always take her advice. So, on a blustery morning in March of 1976, I was sitting at my desk at the Ford Foundation in Manhattan, reading the New York Times. I was a young lawyer at the time researching better ways than courts to resolve disputes. And I saw this headline, "Scientists to Create a Science Court." According to the article, President Gerald Ford's science advisor had the idea that when the government needed science advice on some policy issue that was controversial but pressing, 3 scientist judges should run a court, and 2 scientists would act as advocates for opposing scientific views, and the judges would decide what the scientific truth was for the purposes of the government. The science advisor was going to introduce this idea at a big conference in Boston the next day. So I flew up to Boston early in the morning to the annual conference of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS. This was an organization I had never heard of and didn't plan to spend any time at. I only wanted to attend the science court session and meet the people behind it. So I introduced myself, and they were delighted to have me because I was from the Ford Foundation, and a science court would take money. The session was a revelation to me. I had majored in the history and philosophy of science in college. I studied physics historically, from Thales and Aristotle to Einstein and Bohr. I had learned how the way people view physical reality had evolved over history, what truth could mean philosophically. But I had no idea that there was something called the politics of science, how it interacts with society and government in the modern world. Hoping for Ford money, Mr. Science Advisor invited me to his planning meeting on the science court that he was holding in Washington a month later. Meanwhile, I looked at the AAAS program for the rest of the day, and I decided to go to a couple of other sessions. Why not? I ended up spending the entire week on the Ford Foundation's dime for the most intense education of my life. And this was the education that brought me into Joel's world. I learned about climate change. The great question then was, would the atmosphere heat up from burning fossil fuels, or would it cool down from the immense amount of pollution that was being put into the atmosphere? I learned about species going extinct, nuclear reactor dangers, public interest scientists. I felt like I'd been living in a cocoon. 1 month later, I walked into the Washington offices of the President's science advisor, incredulous that I was there, and I took a seat off to the side of the room. There were a dozen or so men on the committee, no women, and as they spoke, one after the other, the idea seemed crazier and crazier. That at the cutting edge of medicine, energy, space, physics, virtually any field, 3 scientist judges could simply listen to arguments and decide what the scientific truth was, knowing that major legislation could be based on their decision. Billions of dollars could be spent based on essentially a guess. It seemed obvious to me that courts were completely the wrong model for science. One of the younger members of the committee then introduced a dark-bearded man who hadn't spoken at all yet. The member said he'd heard that the man, a professor of physics, was in town for the day on other business, and he'd asked him to sit in on the meeting and give an outsider's point of view. Tactfully, quietly, in a voice serenely self-confident, yet respectful, the professor pointed out that the idea was not only socially harmful, but suffered from several fundamental problems, any one of which would doom it. He didn't explicitly conclude that. He merely presented the problems, but the implications were crystal clear. Finally, somebody made sense. But, as my song said, above all else, goodness was what I heard. The committee members thanked him politely, ignored everything he said, and began planning a major conference on the science court. When the meeting adjourned, I walked up to the professor and I introduced myself as an observer from the Ford Foundation who found his critique to be far more interesting than the science court idea. I'd really like a chance to discuss this further with you, I said. I'm very busy, he answered. Talk to my friend Frank von Hippel. He thinks exactly the same way I do. And he walked off. Total brush off. And yet, years later, his mother would reveal to me that he had told her shortly afterward, I met an interesting woman at the science court, but she was wearing too much jewelry. Well, when he walked off, I just figured, oh, I'd never see him again. We had zero relationship. So why did I keep thinking about him? I realized what it was, and of all the men I had dated, this was the first time I had the feeling that this man simply radiated goodness. His critique felt not only intellectually and politically right, but right like aspirationally right. This guy was different. At the end of my research project, I left the Ford Foundation and I moved to Washington and got a job in the Science Office of Congress. So when Mr. Science Advisor held his national conference on the science court a few months later, I was naturally the one that my office sent to cover it. So it was an icy day in November. The weather was terrible. So I left home extra early to be sure to get there. I arrived very early. Almost no one was there yet. And in the middle of this vast hall of empty seats was the professor, sitting alone and reading. Without giving myself time to think twice, I walked past hundreds of available seats and plopped down right next to him. He could not help but notice. Hi, I said, remember me? He was polite but standoffish, just as before. I stayed put, and the meeting began. Gradually, as the talks went on, we discovered we had identical reactions to the speakers. We laughed at the same stupidities. We joked with each other. For 2 days, we sat next to each other, and it changed this otherwise unendurable conference into a delight. Then he flew back to California. A month later, I walked into a small meeting at the National Science Foundation, and there he was across the oval table. We acknowledged each other with a look, but that was all. When the meeting ended, I went over to say hello. And he suggested that we go out to dinner without the other people. It was a date. Our first. To my astonishment, he told me everything. How his father had died of some mysterious illness, which we later found out was pancreatic cancer. how he'd bought a condo for his mother with money he'd made by investing in rare earths, whatever they were, how he was up for tenure at UCSC and that he was getting himself appointed to more committees to get free trips to Washington. Well, this was moving along. I offered to pick him up in the morning and drive him to Dulles Airport. I hated that drive, but I wanted to spend more time with him. We had a fascinating conversation on the way. He was incredibly interesting. I pulled over at the airport. He said, "Goodbye, thank you," and popped out of the car. We had never even kissed, literally nothing. So Christmas vacation was coming, and the thought of going home to my parents in New Jersey seemed quite depressing. What I really wanted was to see Joel, but how? He obviously liked me, but didn't take me seriously. I would have to organize something. It occurred to me that I should fly to San Francisco, which I thought was near Santa Cruz, and write to him casually that if he wanted to get together for dinner while I was there anyway, I'd be up for it. Now I had to find a free place to stay in San Francisco. It turned out my roommate in Washington had a friend there, and the friend, sight unseen, was willing to let me sleep on her couch. Those were the days in the 1970s when the flip side of don't trust anyone over 30 was everyone under 30 trusted each other. So Joel wrote back and said he would drive up to San Francisco once his classes ended. He came to the tiny apartment. "I made a reservation," he said. Okay, I thought he probably knows a good restaurant, but he hadn't made a dinner reservation. He had reserved a long weekend at an inn in the wine country. But first, he wanted to go back to Santa Cruz, finish some work, then drive down to LA to introduce me to his mother. We had one date. But I grabbed my stuff and I left with him. Oh, decades later, I don't know where it is, I hung above his office door the perfect bumper sticker, which I meant to bring, but I forgot. It says, "Flirt harder, I'm a physicist." Joel's brain worked in a way that amazed me. Most people, if they learn something, they try to remember it, and they may or they may not. But when Joel learned something, his brain automatically reorganized to integrate that new knowledge into a permanent, sensible, findable location. Once he was asked to review a book about the history of 20th century physics, but after he found 3 mistakes in the first 2 pages, he refused to read further because he didn't want unreliable information going into his mental filing system. Sometimes he would get angry about people acting stupidly, and I'd just say to him, "Joel, if everyone were as smart as you, you'd be average." There was only one period of existential struggle that I ever saw Joel go through. It was around 1986. He was asked to be president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, which he had helped found years earlier. It was very unclear at the time whether the theory of cold dark matter would pan out. Martin Rees, who was one of Joel's 3 collaborators on the famous 1984 paper, which Sandy will talk about later, Martin gave it maybe a 10% chance of being right. Joel was torn over whether he should take this opportunity at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Should he move into full-time science politics, or should he stay in science? He agonized over this for weeks, but he had a strong intuition that despite Martin Rees, the theory was right, and knowledge-seeking was really in his blood. For the rest of his scientific career, though, no matter how intensely he was involved in research, he was always on the lookout for an opportunity to do something politically creative that only he could or would do, and was, in his words, spherically sensible, made sense from all angles. In the early years, Joel and I wrote a lot of articles together about science policy, but then he shifted his scientific research from monopoles, which I could not appreciate and which I later found out don't even exist in our universe, to cosmology, which fascinated me. And as the theory developed over years and the data came in, we talked about it all the time. What does it mean that we're not living in the universe that we all think we're in? How can people wrap their minds around these ideas? Joel said the best way to understand something is to try to teach it to skeptical undergrads. So we invented a course at UCSC that we co-taught for 10 years called Cosmology and Culture. We wanted to understand the connection between the ways that people have looked at the universe and how that affects their culture, their politics, their economics, their religions. From Sumer and ancient Egypt to the Enlightenment, a change in cosmology has always led to an upheaval in culture. And we felt that it will happen again when this new double dark cosmology, based on dark matter and dark energy, gets absorbed into our culture. It was when Joel and I started this new phase of working together to find human meaning in his science that I wrote that song, Diamond Mine. In 2006, we published our first book together, The View from the Center of the Universe, Discovering Our Extraordinary Place in the Cosmos. Later, we were invited to give the Terry Lectures at Yale, the first couple ever invited to do that. And that lecture series became the basis for a second co-authored book, The New Universe and the Human Future, How a Shared Cosmology Could Transform the World. Sandy Faber, Joel's very long-term collaborator, will talk about the work Joel actually did, both scientific and political, so I won't. But I do want to just mention one thing. Joel supported women in science every chance he got. For example, when he saw that one of the US science agencies he was working with was giving grants, mostly to men, he got them to start reviewing grant applications anonymously. And that's when the number of women funded rose substantially. I cannot remember all the projects he started or participated in. In addition to his interest in science and politics, he did projects in science and art and science and religion. Joel was beyond generous. He would answer anybody's questions about the universe, especially children, high school students, never worry about the time. In the last few days of his life, when he had stopped eating and could barely walk, he spent all his time composing detailed letters of recommendation for 8 younger scientists who depended on him. He always looked for opportunities to make me happy, and I did the same for him. It was a wonderful game. I folded his turtlenecks, not because I was the female, but because he liked the way I did it. If I ever mentioned that it might be nice to try something, it would appear a day later in an Amazon box. He cooked a hot breakfast for me every day. He read the New York Times food section and actually tried out ambitious recipes from it. If I was cooking, he would always help. He would carefully peel and chop garlic. He would wash and meticulously pick the leaves off cilantro. I asked him once if it didn't annoy him to do these tedious tasks, and he said no, gave him time to think. Tiny gifts for each other. We learned how to do this over time, and it was a good way to live. Joel had his quirks. He could not swim. He was almost barred from graduating Princeton because knowing how to swim was a requirement. It was only because he was the valedictorian that they let him get away with treading water. He knew the names of every food in French, but he could not speak it or any foreign language. He said they were illogical. He could identify any piece of classical music by name, but he could not carry a tune. Here's a real quirk. Joel could not see the difference between me as I look today and me as I looked 40 years ago. I was apparently ageless to him. This sounds sweet and fortunate, but there was a negative side to this kind of blindness. So more than once, we're ready to go out for some event in the evening, and I'm all dressed up with jewelry and makeup and everything. And Joel looks at me and says, "Have you showered yet?" And this was the guy who helped invent face recognition for galaxies. In college, I was puzzled by the famous quote from Herodotus, "Count no man happy until he is dead." I wondered, how can you be happy when you're dead? But when I think about Joel's life, I now understand that quote. We can count him happy. He was successful in his career. He won all kinds of prizes. He had a loving family. He got to live in Santa Cruz. And then when he got cancer and was given 3 to 6 months to live, he got into an experimental immunotherapy treatment that turned that cancer around in 2 months. Both his father and his brother died of pancreatic cancer by the age of 60, and Joel made it to 80. He truly understood how lucky he was. In the summer of 1983, Joel and I were in Rome on Piazza Navona, wandering among the portrait artists and the jugglers, when we noticed a small crowd forming. We walked over to see what was happening, and at the center was a man who seemed to be telling fortunes. Out of the blue, he looked straight at me, and he pointed to Joel, and he said, "Questo non muore mai." This one will never die. We just laughed it off at the time, but when Joel went into his long remission, I thought about this weird prediction, because it seemed to be coming true. But in fact, it's Joel's contributions to this world that can never die. The theory of cold dark matter, his almost 50 graduate students and postdocs who are now leaders themselves. Some of you are here. Some of you are on the live stream. I was going to end the talk here, but something happened a few days ago I want to tell you about. Now, we're all hard-headed scientists, but a few days ago, I walked into the laundry room with a basket of dirty clothes, and I stopped short when I saw the washing machine. I had not been in the room for days. No one else had been in the house. The only window was shut. Jesse? Yeah. 3 galaxies had formed in dust on the washing machine. What could have caused this? So not long afterward, Doug Hellinger came over to help put together this presentation, and I showed him the washer, and he said, well, maybe the spin cycle had somehow spun them into being, although this has never happened in the hundreds of loads I have done before. But okay, I was willing to give Doug's theory a try, and I ran another load just to see, just lifting the lid up enough to kind of get the clothes in and out without disturbing the dust, because I wanted to see if the spin cycle moved dust on the lid of the machine. It did not. I've done 2 or 3 more loads. That does not go away. So this, in my mind, rules out the theory of the spin cycle, creating them. So I have no way to explain the galaxies. I sent the photo to Samara, and she reminded me that one of Joel's favorite sayings was a line from Sherlock Holmes: "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." So to all you scientists here, I am absolutely open to a convincing theory of what caused this, but I will say, if ever there were a message from Joel, this would be it. And just in time for the memorial, so I could show it to you. The great irony, of course, is that when Joel was alive, he would have been the last person to believe this was possible. But who knows what we learn afterward. When Joel died, I said to Samara that it felt like the great library of Alexandria had burned a second time. So much knowledge lost, but so much also given. I'm going to end with a song that I wrote after he died. And this is not so much a song about Joel as for him. And I just call this Joel's song.
Do we know? Can we say how likely it is true? Only here on this earth can beauty be a clue. But your mind soared beyond the stars, where streams of galaxies flow. In the dark strangeness you found there, wild beauty no one had known. Wonder glistened in your eyes. You pierced nature's core where no one had gone before. You lived in awe before the mystery. How could it be that pure thought can see? What did it mean? How could we grasp what words could never say? We sparked together, it was our joy when our minds danced and played. You took me with you beyond the stars. I found my path with you. And when our daughter joined the game, we found three, the exponent of two. You dared to make science care. You fought for this earth, for all it was worth. One night your spirit took flight. I'll say goodbye, but you'll never die.
But if it's true, this universe changes all we knew. And I just want to thank Doug for making my songs into these movies. Thank you, Doug.
I'd like to invite Sandy Faber up to the microphone. Sandy's worked with Joel for,
Gosh, I didn't do the math.
I'd say about 45 years, basically every day. And I also like to say that Sandy got the Presidential Medal of Science from President Obama.
With Joel's help. And I'm totally serious about that. Dear old friends and new friends, that was a hard act to follow, isn't it? You've opened new pathways, not only thinking about the universe, Nancy, because you helped us do that, but also how to remember the life of somebody you cherished. So congratulations on that. I was totally transfixed. We're here, as Samara has said, to celebrate the life of Joel Primack as he lived it. But I'd like to concentrate, in addition, on the causes that he chose, because it was those causes that really tell us about the nature of the person. In all things, Joel Primack always had uppermost the well-being of other people, starting with his near circle, near and dear, his friends, the institutions he worked for, but the wider world. Joel liked to think on different scales. And I'd like to use that metaphor in thinking about his life. So I'm going to start with what was nearest and dearest to him, I think, his scientific passion for cosmology. He had a great gift for creating a vision that unified even the smallest and the largest. Nancy has referred to this important paper, which I'm privileged to be a co-author on, and I'm going to start my remarks by explaining that paper, how it got written, and why I think it's so important. So, let's look at the first slide here, Jesse. I'm going to speak to you rather than use the gong, okay? Can we look at the first one? Yeah, so this is the paper we're talking about. It was published in Nature in 1984. There are 4 authors. And it explained something. It attempted to explain, and it looks as though it was correct. So let me set the stage. What was the answer it was trying to provide? Can we look at the next slide, please? Okay, so Nancy has already shared parts of a remarkable movie. This is one of the most remarkable movies ever made in astronomy. It was led by Brent Tully at the University of Hawaii, but Joel took great pride in this movie because he was a consultant for it. Perhaps the leading one, I'm not quite sure about that, but he spoke about it often. So this is a fly out of our galaxy to the Virgo cluster. And let's take that journey. Start it moving, please. It starts by looking at, I think we advanced by mistake. Let's go back. There we go. There's Orion, familiar, constellation, and you see that these constellations are actually just sort of accidental arrangements of stars along the line of sight. The constellation disappears as we near it. And this is the Great Nebula in Orion. Regions like that are places where stars are being born in our galaxy. So we just took off from Earth. That's the Horsehead Nebula there. And now we're flying around in our galaxy on a scale of maybe, 5,000 light years, something on that order. Here is, in contrast, a place where a star has died, the Crab Nebula. It's a supernova explosion. Oh, no, sorry, that's the Rosette Nebula. The Crab is coming up here in the upper left. Okay, so this is just sort of a tour of what interstellar space would look like if we could get in a rocket and travel much faster than light. Here, I think, is the real genius of this movie. The ability to show us something about what our galaxy looks like in total, even as we've looked at it in detail on smaller scales. So they chose a galaxy, NGC 6582, I think, catchy name, which they imagined looked rather like our Milky Way. And so there's this wonderful morph from, the small scale object to the large object. Large and small Magellanic Clouds there. The view is panning around to the other side of the local group, our neighbor in space. Andromeda, the big one, we're going to fly through its little neighbor, Triangulum M33. And there's a region of star formation there too. We won't tarry. And now the view swings over towards the biggest feature in our part of the cosmos, the Virgo supercluster. This was Brent Tully's sphere of expertise. Brent was the person who estimated the distances of all of these galaxies, which is a hard thing to do, and that is what made the movie possible. So familiar galaxies are going by. That's the whirlpool where spiral structure was discovered. And you'll notice that the distribution of galaxies here is not uniform. It's sort of stringy, and some strings are accumulating at a node, which is where this Virgo cluster forms. And so the end of the movie ends, as Nancy showed us, flying to the very center of Virgo, where there's a giant galaxy, M87, with one of the biggest black holes at its heart. And appropriately, as we land there, that's where the movie is going to end, in the black hole. So, what's the problem here? The problem is, how did all of this happen? Why is it there? Why is the universe very uneven today, with lumps that we call galaxies separated by voids that are unbelievably tenuous? Where did all this structure come from? Why do the galaxies have the sizes and masses that they do? Why do they agglomerate into clusters and even superclusters bigger than that? And how did this all come about in the past? What's the physics of this? So, now I'll proceed to tell you the story of this paper. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we're going. One more, please. Okay, so we sort of have to set the stage about what was going on in physics and astronomy at that time. The 1970s were a very important decade in our subject. The ideas that unified it had not yet emerged, but key pieces of evidence had turned up. In 1964, the cosmic microwave background was discovered, which is heat radiation that's left over from the original Big Bang. It's only 3 degrees above absolute zero today. The universe cools as it expands. But its presence signaled that once upon a time, the universe was very hot. Now, that's very important because in physics, it hadn't really hit astronomers by this time, mid-70s. Physicists were figuring out that the basic physics of nature depended on the temperature. And there was a vision of something called the grand unification theory, which said that at a very critical temperature, get ready, 10 to the 28th degrees Kelvin, things would completely change. We wouldn't have particles as we have them today. Instead, we'd have something called a scalar field. And this scalar field would be magical if put into a universe. It had a particular property that as the universe expands, in fact, it would drive that expansion, it would not get more dilute. So completely counterintuitive. Don't try to explain this in terms of your ordinary intuition about how the world works. This is a switch. It's just different. Now, keep that in mind. Meanwhile, on the astronomy side, astronomers were accumulating evidence for a new kind of matter, dark matter. And I played a small role in this by writing a review article which summarized all the evidence in favor of dark matter, 1979. Why is that important? That's important because before we realized that there was dark matter, we had a big problem in astronomy. We would look at a galaxy and the particles in it would be orbiting at a particular speed. And we would try to compute the amount of matter present needed to hold those particles gravitationally there, and we would fall short by about a factor of 10. So this had been a long-standing puzzle since the 1930s. Our people's discovery, Vera Rubin with her rotation curves, our review article sort of put all this evidence together, and people beginning to grasp that actually there was invisible mass there, creating gravity. And this was a great gift for people interested in galaxies, because now for the first time we had enough matter, enough gravity to hold the structures together. And finally, in the early 1980s, this young man, Alan Guth, realized this mystical thing about the scalar field. You know, if you expand enough, it's possible to go from 10 to the 28th degrees Kelvin to 3 today. That's what's happened. He just ran that movie backwards in his mind, realized that the physics would be completely different at 10 to the 28th degrees Kelvin. By the way, what time is that? You might be interested. It's about 10 to the minus 35 seconds after the Big Bang. We're talking very early times here. And some people came along, Stephen Hawking and his colleagues, a couple of years later, realized that the scalar field would drive faster than light expansion, which in turn generates tiny, tiny, unimaginably tiny quantum fluctuations, smaller than, by orders of magnitude, than any particle we know today. And great minds realized that those fluctuations in matter density would be the seeds, the gravitational, tiny gravitational seeds that create galaxies billions of years later. So we have a story in which quantum mechanics is generating what we live in today. Tiny, tiny fluctuations that grew to 100,000 years, light years in size, and clusters and superstructure on a scale of 1 billion years. So that's the story of the paper. Let's say a couple more words about what the paper itself said. There were these ideas there, and the idea of the quantum fluctuations came from other people, but nobody had taken some of the details of this theory and made an effort to try to figure out what the universe today would actually look like if it started out with this process. And that's what the paper did. And let me bow now in the direction of George Blumenthal, who is a fantastic theoretical physicist and did all the complicated calculations that actually translated the ideas I just discussed into a picture of what the world would look like today. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the main conclusions of the paper. There's roughly 10 times more matter in the universe than we thought just a decade before. The masses of galaxies and clusters that formed from cold dark matter agree with real galaxies and clusters over, what did we say, 8 orders of magnitude in mass, from the smallest possible galaxy to very large scale clusters of galaxies. Now, I mentioned the word cold dark matter. That was the essence of this paper, because part of the ferment of those times was, where did the dark matter, what was the dark matter? Where did this extra gravity come from? And people were speculating that it could be some very tiny low mass particle, or maybe something heavier on the order of a proton in mass. And various folks were trying to figure out what the structure would look like under those different masses. And our paper adopted massive particles and called them cold, because if there's only so much energy around in the temperature of the microwave background, if you have heavy particles, they just don't move as fast as light particles would. So cold dark matter means a heavy dark matter particle. There's a natural dividing line between galaxies and clusters of galaxies. Nobody had realized that that was possible before. Galaxies go through life cycles. They start as young objects with lots of gas, making stars fast. They age. And this life cycle goes faster. It starts earlier and evolves quicker in regions where the dark matter is the densest in the beginning. Okay? So these quantum fluctuations were being created everywhere. There's a pattern. They're the seeds of condensation, gravitational condensation. And where, just by chance, the quantum fluctuations were the strongest, that's where we're going to find big clusters of galaxies today and the most aged galaxies. That was explained here for the first time. This paper has 3,000 citations in Google Scholars. There are several seminal papers from this era, as you might imagine, but this one has 3 times more than any other paper from that era. And I think it's the first paper of its kind in human history, which really took our origins as citizens, denizens of this universe, and put us in the picture all the way from 10 to the minus 35 seconds to where we are today. It told the big story. Next slide, please. Okay, so Nancy told me not to show this slide. Her comment was, people do not want to be made to feel stupid at memorial services. Okay, but I thought you would like to see an example of how scientists actually make an argument, and this slide illustrates that. What is it showing? It's hard to read the red. Objects are more massive towards the top of the diagram, and speeds of motion inside them are bigger towards the right. George's calculations are the solid lines. That's what the theory said, and I came along and contributed the observational data. And if you're keeping score, there's masses here. We go from 1 million solar masses to almost 10 to the 16 solar masses. Okay, so let's move along. Okay. I was going to show you now a picture of the result of many years of work. After this paper, people have been pursuing these ideas and trying to make movies of how the process actually works. Start the movie, please. Okay, so this is a movie made by some folks at NASA, and it's very deceptive, these movies. Actually, the space is expanding, but the point of view also expands at the same time. So it looks like there's no expansion. It's rather that the field of view is just keeping up with that. And this is, this is showing us how the fluctuations start small, but actually wind up making galaxies and clusters of galaxies. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the takeaways for humans. Galaxies today are thousands of light years across. Each one started as a microscopic quantum fluctuation. Galaxies are the indispensable way stations on the path to stars, planets, Earth, and life. This key step in our existence is now understood, and the real takeaway for me is at the bottom of the slide, and you may disagree, it's food for thought. We live and die by the laws of physics. There were no miracles, and the implications for the future of humanity are profound. We're going to live and die by our own strategy, not by a divine intervention. Personal view. Next slide, please. All right, how the paper got written, I'll be brief on that. Joel had the vision and was the orchestra leader. George did the highly technical calculations. I provided the comparison to data, but Joel surveyed the whole field, drew the themes together, and wrote virtually all the text. It should have been Primack et al., but characteristically, Joel was so generous in working with his colleagues, he listed us alphabetically. What was it like collaborating with Joel? It was ChatGPT before there was ChatGPT. Encyclopedic knowledge, total recall, knew all the physics and could explain it to you. I learned all my cosmology from Joel, and always had the big picture. Finally, I'll just add something. He was an optimist. He's always can do. In fact, he could be infuriating in this regard. He had a way of saying, you know, we have all the data, it's on disk, all we have to do is, and I thought to myself, does this man not realize that he's just described 2 years of work to translate that data into the next stage? Okay, next slide. Papers on a wide range of subjects. One of the last was on coal and exoplanets, believe it or not. Always thinking in new domains. Next slide, please. Amazing students. We'll hear from some of them. I think as an advisor, he was not always easy. In particular, he was not prescriptive. He was always offering possibilities, and the successful student was the person who was able to take the good, see the gem in it, and work with it. Next slide, please. Collaborator Avishai Deckel, who worked with Joel for more than 45 years, an Israeli from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, visited us every year in the summer for 40 years. They wrote more than 100 papers together. They founded the Santa Cruz Galaxy Workshops, which created an amazing community of researchers over the years. And it's a real tragedy that Avishai passed away 3 days after Joel. So this twin loss has been very, devastating, actually, I think, for the theoretical expertise that we have in our group. Next slide. All right, a science policy legacy. Time is getting long. I think it might be too long to actually read this. Shall I summarize it? Okay, so his collaborator was mentioned, Frank von Hippel. They were both very young people. Frank, slightly older, but young. Joel, graduate student at Stanford. This sounds so typical. Asks his advisor, famous physicist Sidney Drell, with people like you talking to the president, why don't we have better advice about science in government? I mean, can you just imagine a question like that? At the time, Drell was working on classified projects in Nixon's White House and couldn't talk to Joel about this. And according to Frank von Hippel, started his own workshop that involved students at Stanford. A great idea came out of the workshop, namely, we could use freshly minted scientists as science advisors in Congress, the president, yes, and science societies. This idea took root, amazingly. Joel sold the idea along with Frank. Next slide, please. And everybody got into the game. These science and policy fellows are everywhere. Every organization now has them. And this is just a selection of the many examples you can find on the web. Next slide, please. Okay. Growing out of that was a book which Joel wrote with Frank together on the responsibilities of scientists. Founded a movement, started out by being featured on the front page of, get it, the National Enquirer. Can you imagine that? Right? It was the first book of its kind, and it became part of a broader movement. And I'll summarize by saying it helped to establish the principle that scientists working as advisors to the government had responsibilities to the broader public interest. We need that voice ringing in our ears today, don't we? Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so it was a forerunner in more ways than one. Its title really took on. It was the first book that was titled Advice and Dissent, and it even inspired a movie. Okay, so what's next here? Next slide. Additional policy legacies. You probably have not waked up in the morning wondering or worrying about nuclear power in satellites above your head. But this was a problem that was raised to Joel and Frank von Hippel by a Soviet scientist when one of the Soviet satellites came down to Earth and spread radioactive debris. The Soviets appealed for help on banning nuclear power in orbit. Joel convened a meeting chaired by the Federation of American Scientists and reached a voluntary agreement, which is still in effect, between Russia and the United States to not use these satellites. So let's just sort of stand back and reflect on the real world impact of this young person. He was barely out of graduate school when he did all of these things. It's just amazing. So I'm going to now move to the third phase of Joel's career. Next slide, which, as Nancy has so eloquently told us about, the issue of finding the larger meaning in cosmology. They taught their course. The course has led to 2 books jointly authored, an acclaimed lecture series. Next slide, please. And here are probably too long to go into in full detail, but I'm going to just pick out the 4th item here, which I think to me summarizes what they were getting at with their books. Humanity has a unique responsibility to the universe because we are the guardians of an extraordinary occurrence in cosmic evolution, a brain capable of conceiving the entire universe. So, in these 2 books in their lecture, they really captured for me the unique, our situation here on Earth, how Earth could have been produced by our universe and why Earth really is the center of the universe by virtue of its unique properties. And we should cherish that. Here's a final slide listing Joel's many awards and recognitions. At the end of his life, he received many awards, which took particular note of his unique ability to connect these abstract scientific thoughts and bring them down to a message that people really need in order to make concrete decisions, especially now today about the future of Earth. So I'll close there and remember with great delight and joy my thousands and thousands of hours meeting with Joel and learning from him. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Doug. Doug is one of Joel's PhD students and longtime collaborators and dear friend.
Thank you, Samara. I've known Joel over 45 years. Joel was a rare confluence of love and logic, woven together with unbounded curiosity and optimism. My dear friend and colleague, we collaborated on many projects and in a variety of fields over the years. But first, Joel was my PhD advisor, and how lucky I was. When I was a graduate student, there was no internet, no Google, no Claude, no ChatGPT, Gemini, or Perplexity, no instant research and answers. Scientific research, even theoretical physics, involved serious manual labor. You had to walk over to the library and spend hours plowing through physical books and journals. You might even need to read articles in the original language they were authored in. But I had Joel. If I had any semblance of a good question or idea, my trip to the library would be preceded by a trip to Joel's office. I put in my hard time, but that time was incredibly more productive after a conversation with Joel. In 45 plus years, I can't remember a single conversation with Joel where I didn't walk away having learned something and with a new opportunity in hand. So what was it like working with Joel? Well, this is Santa Cruz, so I'm going to have to go with a surfing analogy. I've surfed a tsunami. Working with Joel was the intellectual equivalent, exhilarating and empowering. And always, I wound up somewhere new and far beyond where I expected. Different fields of research, different departments, different careers, different economic sectors. Joel facilitated truly extraordinary connections and went out of his way to make sure every endeavor was fabulously resourced. Facilitating connections with luminaries in their fields was the rule, not the exception with Joel. When Joel professed a lack of knowledge, a lack of expertise about a subject, he made sure you had the best possible advice. Now we're talking Joel. So not being an expert meant that he could only give you a 1-hour lecture on the subject, not a 10-hour lecture. But far more important than knowledge is all that goes into its discovery, the approach, the thinking style. The experience of thinking with Joel, or just observing his thought process, enriched all of us fortunate enough to work directly with him. But let me wind back the clock and recount first working with him. So we're discussing possible thesis research projects, and he mentions that his friend, Francois Angler, 2013 Nobel Prize for the Higgs, will be visiting for a while. And as always, he suggests a few papers to read and discuss with Francois. Great experience. Now, sometime later, Joel suggests another paper he thinks I'll find interesting. I see a connection between the two subjects, and this becomes my PhD orals projects. There is no way I'd have read those papers if Joel had not suggested them to me. Now segue to another meeting with Joel. A question comes up that's quite profound and challenging to follow up on. As it turned out, Stephen Hawking is visiting at UC Santa Barbara, and Joel arranges for us to meet Hawking and encourages me to ask my question, explaining we'll get some oracular response that we can ponder. And that is indeed exactly what happened. This was so long ago, at the time Hawking was talking in a just barely perceptible fashion, but with his inimitable elegance and efficiency. I recall walking away with Joel, and we looked at each other laughing and exclaimed, that could well be right. So my first research project with Joel includes working with a future Nobel laureate and speaking with Stephen Hawking, my first wave with Joel. Now, Joel fully supported my orals project, ostensibly my thesis research, but I'm aware it's highly theoretical and incredibly distanced from practical observations and experiments, and this is early 1984. And I've lucked into being at the center of a scientific revolution with my advisor, Joel, among the leaders. I'm obviously missing an incredible opportunity. Maybe I should discuss a new path with Joel. And he's Joel. You just can't go wrong asking about anything. Joel's eyes light up and he declares, "This is the golden age of cosmology. Eventually data will be pouring in. As a scientist, you want to go where the data is, or better, will be." At this time, Joel is working very closely with George Blumenthal, and the two of them come up with a perfect project for me, Cosmic Strings. The project was perfect, combining my expertise and many of my interests and pointing me towards what was coming in cosmology. But there was just one problem. While some of the analysis could be done analytically, the full analysis required a supercomputer. And I was a purist. I had vowed to never touch a computer. Oh, and there was no supercomputer on campus, or so I thought. But I had Joel. Joel introduces me to UCSC adjunct professor Harwood Kosky, a physicist who's an IBM Watson Fellow, which Joel describes as a Nobel laureate of industry and will prove to be another great mentor in my life. Harwood is leading a project across the street in the computer engineering department in which they've built a supercomputer that no scientists on campus have learned how to use. If I learn how to use it, I can run a simulation with cosmic strings. But this is 40 years ago. Interdisciplinary research was far rarer, nothing like today, and you had to walk across the street, even further than the library. So now I'm working with Joel, George, and Harwood, but it gets even better. Avishai Deckel is also interested in cosmic strings, and Joel arranges for me to spend a month in Jerusalem, now working with Joel, George, and Avishai. And I'm a fledgling graduate student. This takes a while, but eventually I can do the simulations, and I wind up presenting my results at Princeton, meeting Alexander Vilenkin, the creator of the theory, and at IBM Almaden Research Center in support of Harwood's grant. And I've accepted an offer from Harwood to join his UCSC CE research group. So wave number 2 has swept me into the CE department, an amazing experience that actually led to 3 distinct career paths, and Joel with me every step of the way. All I had to do was stay on the wave. Cosmic strings proved negligible in cosmology, but what in education and what opportunities Joel created for me. And this was just the first few years. The best waves were still ahead. When I met Joel, he had tenure. It was only around 10 years ago that I realized that, Mike Naumberg, who hired Joel, explained to me how seriously Joel had risked being denied tenure by pursuing his political activism as a responsible scientist. There's so much to admire about Joel, but the better you know him, the more you find out about how just how courageous he was, professionally and personally. That's it. Then I discovered Joel's intellectual ancestry. You can see how perfectly Joel fits in and how he'd forfeit tenure for his principles without hesitating. Scientific and mathematical knowledge carries greater and greater civilizational impact and responsibility through the generations. Joel's direct academic lineage shows how profoundly true this is, the progression from leading mathematicians of their time to leading scientists and through the atomic age. Oppenheimer being Joel's academic great-grandfather, and both Joel and his advisor Sid Drell making huge contributions to scientifically informed policy design. So this is Joel, advisor Sidney Drell, and then all the way back from bottom to top, dating back to very, very famous mathematicians such as Gauss. Okay. Oh, what was I here? Okay. It was not long ago that I recall walking into Joel's office and hearing him say, it used to be that the government was clamoring for scientific knowledge so that they could make better informed policy decisions. Now we have it, and they're going out of their way to disregard it. But just looking at Joel's intellectual ancestry, but we're just looking at Joel's intellectual ancestry, not Joel's descendants, or we were. Joel advised 50 PhD students and has 3 generations of academic descendants. Joel once remarked that science is an eternal debate. You try everything. And what follows from that was something I've heard Joel exclaim time and time again. It's not ruled out. Meaning, we have to look at that too, however unpopular it might be. Joel was immune to dogma and acutely sensitive to scientific prejudice. What immediately comes to mind is lambda, the cosmological constant, aka dark energy. Certainly among the most mercurial, most important, and most problematic subjects in physics. We know lambda is crucially important today, but during the era of Joel's earlier students, theoretical bias was very dismissive of it, but it was not ruled out. So Joel's students did not miss the opportunity of studying the precursors of what was destined to be today's leading theory. On the other end of the spectrum, outside of academia, Joel was playful and sometimes amazingly clever in his playfulness. I'm not sure what prompted this, maybe mentioning consulting as a quant at some point, but Joel tells me this story dating back to the early 70s when he and George decided to dabble in the stock market. Now they're smart, and they know they're going to lose if they're playing someone else's game, so they think, what edge do we have as scientists? And Joel says, ytterbium. The space program is going to come up with all kinds of new technologies, and they're going to find new uses for rare earths, so they invest in Molycorp brilliantly. As far as I could tell, Joel's interest in finances was entirely pragmatic, but an amusing intellectual challenge that's profitable to boot, that must have been irresistible. But Joel's most beautiful way of beating the odds was living in awe, which he would describe as his chosen profession. And we're talking Joel, so naturally a detailed scientific explanation followed, referring to Jennifer Steller's research. Living in awe has immense health benefits. And Joel combined living in awe with unconditional optimism. I never asked Joel how he could remain so optimistic given his deep grasp of reality, but now I realize this was integral to his way of being. And though sometimes seemingly unfathomable, anything less and you might miss something wonderful. The best decisions in life begin with putting yourself in the best possible environments. You could do no better than being with Joel, in service of science and education and truly the greater good, and living in awe. This is why I always found a way back to work with him. The tide eventually turns, and each time it did, an inflection point in my life, I seized the opportunity to work with Joel again. And always, Joel instantly welcomed me with open arms. And now I'm still on the fourth wave with Joel, which I've been on for the last 16 years, and will no doubt carry me for the rest of my life. I'll miss the ocean of his intellect, but the ocean of his passion for life and discovery will be with me forever. And I'm still learning from him. My father once told me, it's better to touch a few people deeply than many superficially. Joel touched many people, certainly including myself, very deeply. And if you include fundamental contributions to the understanding of the universe and ourselves, and mitigating existential threats such as the insanity of orbiting nuclear reactors, Joel touched everyone deeply and in perpetuity. With Joel's passing, I feel an immense void. The universe feels so much emptier. But then I hear Joel's voice, ever positive, ever caring, ever supportive. Voids are among our greatest gifts. We would not be here without them. And they're never empty. They just inspire us to go deeper.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. All right, I'm going to say a few words. I got the chance to say some of this to him last summer at his and Sandy's and George's 80th birthday. Who here was in the room? Yeah, so thank you. Hi. That was quite a night. It was very meaningful to me, and I think to him, because he knew at that point that the cancer had metastasized. He wasn't ready to talk about it publicly, but he knew, and it mattered that I got to tell him what a good dad he was, right to his face. And he got misty. And I thought, well, that's probably the highest and best use of public speaking. I told him on that day that were I to answer the prompt on the screen, which was ultimately meant to be for his young collaborators, How has knowing/working with Joel impacted my life? I would say in two big ways. The first is genetics. He had impossibly youthful skin all the way to the end. Those rosy cheeks, those little puffs under his eyes when he smiled that my kid has too. And of course, the big brain. When I was in junior high, shout out to my junior high friends back there, my civics teacher introduced a tome of a book called Cultural Literacy and gave us extra credit in class if we could answer random questions out of it. My family got a copy of this book, and on long car rides up to San Francisco or down to visit my dad's mom in Los Angeles, he would thumb through the book and quiz me, although it never felt like pressure. It felt like a portal. Inevitably, he'd know more on the subject, whatever subject, than the book said, and he'd share it with enthusiasm. Certain subjects, like Shakespeare, I'll have you know, I could always beat him. And he and Nancy often finished each other's sentences. But it became family lore that Joel had, as I coined it, a murky abyss. In fact, when I applied to Princeton, where he had been the valedictorian, as we've heard, of the great class of 1966, I wrote in my application that I wanted to go there to acquire a murky abyss of my very own. But the other big impact that Joel had on me, besides genetics, which he could barely help, was something that only happens if you're extremely deliberate and full of care. Generosity. Yes, he had a big brain, and we all knew it. But he didn't lord it over me, competing over whose abyss was murkier, as it were. I remember clearly him telling me when I was little, Samara, I'm losing brain cells and you're gaining them. And when I was in my early 20s and I took a pass at editing my parents' first book proposal, he entirely deferred to my advice, and they ended up hiring me on as their secret weapon. It's the kind of generosity that just seemed like, well, yeah, of course. He had always brought me to physics conferences around the world, introduced me around, had always wanted me in the room, had wanted to hear my opinion at the dinner table, had wanted to hear my ideas. But I know this is not standard at any dinner table, but especially with young women whose ideas are undervalued so regularly in our culture and whose dreams are often mocked. He respected mine, and he encouraged them. In fact, when I did get into Princeton, I called him my first week. It hadn't hit me, comically, what it really meant that he'd been valedictorian, till I was on that iconic Gothic campus, and every kid I met had gotten a perfect score on the SATs and mentioned the fact liberally. Through the phone, I said, wait, okay, Dad, wait. So, you were valedictorian? And he said, yes. And I said, does that mean you got, like, all A's? And he said, no, Samara, mostly A pluses. But then I said, quite firmly, I don't think I'm going to follow in your footsteps. I think there's a very good chance I'm going to be a B-average theater kid. And he said, I hope so. Don't follow in my footsteps. I didn't have any fun. And that was not just a dad saying, I don't want you to feel inferior to me. It was a dad saying, I value your interests. I value that you are not me. I want you to have a good time. And also, by the way, he was saying, I value art. It matters. Theater matters. I had so many friends in college and in New York City after college and in grad school when I got my MFA in acting who were in a painful struggle with their parents who didn't support them financially or in spirit. My parents did both. My dad was deeply generous with his money, but families with means can just as easily withhold them on principle. because their kids need to learn independence, or because they don't respect their kids' choices. I never, ever felt abandoned or shamed for picking a less traditional path. I felt nothing but pride. And you all know that pride, because I believe it was not physically possible to have a conversation with Joel without hearing how proud of me he was. Whenever I'd call home, even if it was Nancy and me chatting for an hour, he would listen in. Sometimes half listen if he was on a group Zoom with many of you. But he didn't want to miss any of my news or my latest ideas. I cannot compete with the universe, but he never made me feel like I had to. As I wrote on Facebook just after his death, I'm an only child, and he made me feel as special as the universe. He may even have liked me more. In fact, I think on some level, my book, Permission to Speak, and the work I have done for years has been to offer folks the kind of permission to believe their ideas are good, to share them with full-throated ease that my parents gave me. But it's more than that. You know, people always say science is cold, that facts are cold, that the work of science is to prioritize objective data and logic and evidence over emotion or human experience or spirit. But I think I learned from my dad that the search for truth is anything but cold. That although Joel didn't give off woo-woo vibes, he gave off something just as spiritual. He was animated by love. He loved his work. He loved his collaborators. He loved the search. He loved the beauty of the universe and the beauty of the calculations capturing the universe. He was a romantic, always hoping, always seeking the truth of the thing. In his obituary, the New York Times unearthed a hilarious quote from Joel they had found in the archives of the American Institute of Physics. Maybe some of you saw it. Apparently, when Joel was a grad student at Stanford with his thesis advisor, Sid Drell, Sid kept flying to Washington to advise, at that point, President Johnson on military tech and national security. And, quote, Dr. Primack recalled, I would keep asking Sid, how come this stupid Vietnam War is going on? You're meeting with the president frequently, serving on his science advisory committee. Can't you tell him how dumb this war is? If you ever had breakfast with him while he was reading the New York Times, I don't know how many people have experienced this besides us, but you would know, he talked like this every morning. He'd have the perfect solution to the latest utterly stupid problem, and because it was Joel, it was, of course, actually the perfect solution, and he'd share it with all the bite of someone animated not by cynicism, but by love. They must do this. It is the only thing to do that makes sense. Who cares if it's not realistic? It is the right thing to do. He and my mom had a favorite anonymous quote that both of them ended up putting on their business cards that made no sense when I was little and all the sense now. It read, bring me into the company of those who seek the truth and deliver me from those who have found it. I asked him last summer, when I knew he didn't have long, what kind of legacy did he want to leave? Not his work. That, my mom's right, we're right, is immortal. But what did he hope to inspire in the next generation of scientists? And he paused, looking out at the sea from the deck. And then he replied, truth, justice, in the American way. He said it sheepishly because it is Superman. And because the American way has never been as honorable as we've always wanted to believe. But that is what he stood for. Truth, justice, defending democratic ideals, strong moral compass, supporting endless progressive causes, feminism, environmentalism, disarmament, human rights, for decades and decades and decades. Love, hope. He was a romantic, and I am a romantic in his lineage. And it wasn't just high-minded ideals. His moral compass was an everyday thing, a character thing. Apparently, when my mom's mom first met Joel, she summed up her take on him afterwards, telling Nancy, "He has nice ways." He did, right? And I never heard him lie. I never heard him speak ill of someone unless they transgressed on a value he held dear. And then he would offer his mind. He was so generous with his time and his care. He loved my mom and me dearly and was grateful for the life he had had. He said in that same conversation on the deck last summer, "Listen, in this home with Nancy, life is sweet." And he's the only person I know who always brought the shopping cart back to its spot. It's funny my mom said that about cilantro, because now I weep whenever I chop cilantro or garlic. He was just so focused and so caring about what was right in front of him, whether it was the secrets of the cosmos or the ingredients of the Instant Pot. My dad was always so proud of me. But as I gathered my thoughts today, I realized I am just so proud of him. Thank you. So we have a wonderful reception that is prepared in the reception area, but I would like us to take a few minutes for those of you who would like to say a word or two. Yeah, I know. Is Matthew Fox here? Yes. Would you like to begin? And then let's just see, this might be the sort of thing where a few people popcorn up. It might be the sort of thing where a few people line up here. We realize that we've been sitting for a while, but I really would love everybody who has been hoping to say a word to say it. So let's just, I'll sort of moderate this section, but please.
I would like to follow on that and just invite everybody to stand for a minute. Stand and stretch, breathe. Nothing like acknowledging our bodies, which are, after all, 13.8 billion years old. We have a right to take a nap and to stretch once in a while. So here we are. So it's been just a moving moment hearing these powerful stories, both Joel's intellectual contributions and his personal contributions. And before we began, Nancy and I spoke, and she showed some trepidation before her talk, but I just want to say it was exquisite, nothing short of exquisite, and your poetry and your music said it all. Just said so much. I was reminded, the word beauty has come up many times. Ernesto Cardenal, the great Nicaraguan poet, as many of you may know, wrote a poem this long called Cantico Cosmico, the cosmic song, when he was hearing about the new cosmology. And I met with him on several occasions. But he says in that long epic poem, we can argue about the meaning of the universe, and we can argue about the causes of the universe, but we cannot argue about the beauty of the universe. And if that doesn't unite all of us, and of all generations, of all cultures, of all religions, and of none, what can unite us? So I was invited by Nancy to say a few words, and I just want to comment that we're remembering, obviously, a great human being, a great man with a great soul, and, of course, a great scientist with a great calling. His calling to study the universe in all its splendor, all its awe, all its majesty, and all its wonder. Joel was a mentor to so many in this room. How many here would identify as a student of Joel's? You certainly told great stories about it, indeed. And all of us who've read his work and Nancy's work are students of Joel's as well. And the moments I had with him were always so memorable and moving. And of course, his students, as has been noted, 50 PhD students carrying on the glorious work of learning more about the world, the universe, the cosmos we live in, and that birthed all of us and all of everything. My job and vocation is as a spiritual theologian, and I'm thoroughly indebted to Joel and Nancy, who I would call a power couple in the best use of that word, the best sense of the term. Their books, View from the Center of the Universe, and so forth. View from the Center of the Universe is a classic. Now, when I think of the universe and urge others to do so, I'm reminded of three teachings from a mentor of mine, Thomas Aquinas, in the 13th century. He dared to bring Aristotle, who's already been mentioned this evening, Nancy brought him up, the greatest scientist of the era, into Western Europe. And of course, he came by way of Islam, which was one strike against him, Aristotle. He was being translated in Baghdad, 7 days a week, really, 24 hours a day. They had teams translating him. And of course, another strike against Aristotle was that he was a, quote, pagan, meaning he didn't know the Bible. And the third strike, which you still hear today from fundamentalists, is that he was a scientist. Who needs scientists? Who needs pagans? Who needs someone who's coming to us through Islam? But Aquinas, like Joel and many scientists of the 20th century, had the courage to think forward. And here are some thoughts he had. Number one, the most excellent thing in the universe, he said, is not the human. The most excellent thing in the universe is the universe itself. And all beings are here to serve the universe, including and especially human beings. Joel had this most excellent vocation to study and teach us the truths and wonders of the most excellent thing in the universe itself. And the most sacred thing in the universe itself. Geologian Thomas Berry, whom Nancy and Joel cite from time to time, said this: we will recover our sense of wonder and our sense of the sacred. Notice he identifies the two, wonder, awe, and sacred, only if we appreciate the universe beyond ourselves as a revelatory experience of that numinous presence whence all things come into being. Indeed, the universe is, he writes, the primary sacred reality. We become sacred by our participation in this more sublime dimension of the world about us. The young especially are to be invited into this awareness. And as Joel and Nancy put it in their book, View from the Center of the Universe, they say, in many ways, the young everywhere have more in common with one another than with the old who live in this country or even in their own house. Young people do not share a single religion or language, but they share an epic and cosmic and terrestrial history that their elders will never know. So I sense this in so many stories that came out today, how oriented to the younger generations Joel's work was. A second teaching from Aquinas is this. He said, a mistake about creation results in a mistake about God. A mistake about creation results in a mistake about God. But turn that around. An insight about creation results in an insight about the divine. Joel left us with many insights about the divine because he and his co-workers discovered so many insights about the universe, many of which were brought forth brilliantly this morning by his co-worker. For this, too, we thank him. Another teaching from Aquinas relevant to the life and work and legacy of Joel Primack is this. Aquinas said, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, nature and the Bible. Nature and the Bible. And this is why the scientist's vocation is so noble. It is an unpacking of the revelation of nature in all its aspects. The universe is itself a source of revelation. It speaks to us if we listen. It tells us truths if we listen and study and pay attention and notice, as he said when he was 6 years old. It fills us with awe and what Rabbi Heschel called radical amazement. Radical amazement. And it was said by his student that this is a summary of his life, and he named it himself, that his life was a life of awe. And of course, Heschel also points out, awe is a beginning of wisdom. Oh, we're so hungry for wisdom today. We have so much knowledge, we had to invent computers to store it all. But the wisdom, have we grown in wisdom? Knowledge is not enough. Knowledge factories are not enough. The original meaning of university, invented in Aquinas' day, was a place to go to find your place in the universe. And the guardian was the divine feminine, as has been brought up a couple of times this morning. Joel's commitment to the divine feminine. That it was the divine feminine that oversaw the wisdom at the university. And wisdom around the world is feminine. Tara in Buddhism and so forth. And of course, Sophia in Greek. And in Hebrew, Chokmah. And Mary in the Christian tradition. Wisdom is feminine, and she has been banished for too long from the university system. So, Joel was a person who has been pointed out, was so committed to the whole, to the universe, and of course this makes him automatically postmodern. David Bohm said, I'm a postmodern physicist who begins with the whole. So we begin with the whole when we dwell in the mindset of Joel. His very vocation was to think beyond the species narcissism that dominates so much of our human history. And he cared about something bigger and more primal than mere capitalist visions of money and power and money. So I'm going to give a couple concrete examples I had in interacting with Joel and Nancy about his bringing his values to everyday life. I started a program years ago called Yell Awe, for inner city teenagers. At that time, 64% of black boys in America were not graduating from high school, 64%. And 65% of boys on Indian reservations were not graduating from high school. So I asked myself, are these kids dumb or is education dumb? So I started this program, it started as an after-school program with inner city kids in Oakland and who were dropping out of school. And one of our themes in the program was cosmology and ecology. They were not getting that in school. And Thomas Berry says ecology is functional cosmology. So really they're the same thing, caring for the universe, caring for our Earth. And I invited Nancy and Joel to drive up to Oakland, which they generously did, and to teach our students for a day. And of course, they brought their films of the universe, story, and so forth. And it was a very powerful moment of amazement and awe for these young kids. And the program was such that we also emphasized creativity. We had kids making movies, their own movies, and so forth. But with this theme of cosmology and ecology and a couple other themes relating to morality. But I just want to point out how generous it was of Joel and Nancy, but the Joel we've heard about today who advised presidents and so forth and traveled around the world. He was willing to take a trip to the inner city of Oakland to share his wisdom. And another occasion, there was a group called Creation Spirituality Communities. That's my tradition, Creation Spirituality. And they were celebrating the 25th anniversary of my book called Original Blessing, which kind of did not please the Vatican at the time when it came out. And this celebration was held in Indianapolis, Indiana, of all places. And Nancy and Joel flew to Indianapolis, Indiana to spend several days with us at this conference and offered their own workshop. But this is what I remember most about their presence. In my version of education, we do body work and artwork as well as intellectual work. We bring both elements in. And we did body prayer, and we did, which is circle dancing and also spiral dancing. And Joel and Nancy participated fully in it. There's a big smile on your face. And I'll never forget that, this great scientist being so humble. And you know the word humble comes from the Latin word humus, that means earth. So earthbound as well as cosmically awestruck was Joel. And so humble to join the rest of us in these dances with smiles on their faces. In Indianapolis, Indiana, of all places. And so what I think of when I think of Joel is a word that his daughter just brought up, generous. How generous he was. And that word generous is one of my favorite words. When you look it up, etymologically, it's amazing. It includes the word genus, so it's about kin and kind and relationship. But it also includes the word origin and kinship. And of course, that's what he's been studying his whole life. The origins of everything by way of the origins of the universe. So in conclusion, I just want to say that Joel taught us our kinship to the stars and galaxies, supernovas, and our sacred relationships to Father Sky, to Mother Earth, and to one another. And in their book, The New Vision and the Human Future, the New Universe and the Human Future, how a shared cosmology could launch a global can't read my writing here. A global, what is it? Transform the world, great. His values come through so strong. And his teachings about human behavior and what we're capable of when we place ourselves in the context of this generous universe. As they say, think cosmically, act globally. And they call for what they called a purified religion. Not a religion of dogma that is stuck in the past, but that religion brings its own energy of story and of gathering and of celebration and of Sabbath and of gratitude and generosity, that science and healthy religion, science and spirituality are meant to be partners, not antagonists. All this comes through. What a wonderful life we are celebrating today. What a wonderful mentor. What a wonderful husband and father and teacher and friend. Thank you, Joel. Stole your mic.
Thank you. Okay, I'm reading the room. I know there's food and said celebration gathering happening soon, but I want to just offer the floor for maybe 2 folks to speak now, and then, or possibly more, and then there's also a guest book in the other room for anything that you wanted to share, but maybe you could write it down instead. Can I see a few hands of people who have been really planning to speak, just so that I can get a sense? I love it, I love it, I love it. Okay, great. I'm gonna start with you. I'm gonna go to Nina and you. Okay, and then we'll see what happens. Thank you.
All right. Firstly, thanks to Nancy and Samara for organizing this, and also Doug. I'm really feeling lucky that I'm here today so that I can learn so much more about Joel that I'm probably not going to learn previously in like any Galaxy workshops. For those who don't know me, I'm Hao Zhang, and currently I am a postdoc in Canada. So my connection with Joel is that back in 2017, I was fortunate enough to come here to the United States and worked with Joel, Sandy, and David as an exchange student from China. So apparently that experience was life-changing, but today I would like to talk about 2 parts of Joel's work, earlier works, that has great impact on me. So by earlier, I mean prior to 2017. So the first part happened like 25 to 30 years ago. So Joel advised a student whose name is Risa Wexler, who then joined Stanford as a professor. And Risa went on to convince another younger student in 2006, whose name is Peter Beruzzi. And she convinced him that, well, instead of doing laser physics, they can work together on connections between dark matter halos and galaxies. So in 2018, when Peter was already a new professor at University of Arizona, he then convinced me that instead of, say, doing observations for quasars or other black holes, I can also try building my own theoretical model of connections between galaxies and black holes. And eventually, Peter became my PhD advisor. So that was quite a great experience. I'm really grateful that it was Joel who got me connected with Peter, either both directly and indirectly, to such a great person and such a great advisor. So the second set of Joel's work that has impact on me actually goes even back further to the Cold War. So back in 2022, I attended this Galaxy workshop for the first time after the COVID. And I presented this black hole empirical model called Trinity that Peter and I were developing. So after presenting it, Joel asked me this question. So why do you name this model as Trinity? So my first reaction was that Joel was asking why, as a non-religious person, why I was naming my model with something that is so commonly used in Christianity. But then he said, well, actually I didn't know at that time. Trinity was also the name for the first atomic bomb experiment carried out by the United States. So again, I didn't know that, and I was honestly quite puzzled why he would come up with such a question. Of course, I didn't know the background back then. So I just shrugged and said, well, it was completely a coincidence. And a few months later, I stumbled upon one of the talks that he gave at the Princeton's Alumni Association, where he introduced, well, in addition to his first meeting with Nancy, he also introduced his works, his efforts during the Cold War, including advocating against nuclear proliferation and helping Andrei Sakharov to pass the letter to Pugwash Conference, and also helping other Russian physicists and other scientists to emigrate. And knowing all of these, all of a sudden I could finally see where Joel was coming from with his question about the name of Trinity. And I think more importantly, these efforts of Joel really shows us how scientists can play a role in social and political issues with their unique connections with other scientists in the world and also their unique expertise. And I think, after all, the Earth is where we, at least astronomers, base our life and research on. Before JWST, we definitely have a lot of ground-based telescopes, so I think that's obvious. And I think it is critical that while we're spending lots of time writing proposals chasing the earliest galaxies and black holes, we also spare a good chunk of our energy and time to think about the human society, and especially in a difficult time like this. And yeah, I guess I still want to visit United States in the future, so I'll stop from saying anything more explicit because this is also live stream. Yeah, thanks.
Hold on for just a moment.
Okay.
You've run out of battery.
Oh.
Yeah, I need this. Okay, thank you. A lot of acts that are unfollowable. I will provide a followable one for later. This was extraordinary. What a pleasure to be here and to see all of you and to celebrate Joel. My name's Nina. Like many people in this room, I owe my career and the work that I can't believe I get to do every day in large part to Joel. And I just have a few quick tidbits that I wanted to share. And many of them feel like echoes at this point, but we'll do it anyway. Joel was the first physicist that I really got to know, really got to spend time with. Because of Joel, I thought that if you were a physicist, you spent your time eagerly and aggressively trying to understand the universe, and also using that knowledge and expertise to tackle issues here on Earth. It wasn't until I left Santa Cruz and entered the big world that I realized how incredibly unusual and remarkable this was. As we've heard, kind of cliche, but Joel's head was in the cosmos, but his feet were very much firmly planted on the ground. And as we've heard, he and Nancy devoted large parts of their career to tackling issues here on Earth. I think this is something we all need to channel as much as possible in this time. Okay, number 2. With Joel, and I know this sounds crazy and probably wasn't true, but I always got this feeling that he genuinely thought that the people he worked with were as bright and capable as he was. If only he could point them to the right stack of papers, show them the right equations, and convey the idea in just the right way. Maybe it was 10% as bright and capable, but still way more than we actually were. Joel had much more faith in me than I did in myself, and it was this, I believe, this attitude that allowed his students to take on and to solve bigger and more challenging problems than they ever thought they could. 3, I had the great privilege of witnessing Joel and Nancy's professional partnership. Spending time with them, it was evident just how much they admired each other, deeply respected each other's perspective, really got each other's brains buzzing when thinking about connections and big revolutionary ideas, how they challenged each other, and most importantly, how much fun they had together. 4, and last, and as we've heard, and how we all in this room can attest, anyone who spent more than 15 minutes talking to Joel knew just how much he loved and admired and was proud of Samara and the incredible career that she built and the beautiful family that she's made. That's all I have.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Helen Quinn, and I am a physicist too. I knew Joel in graduate school, and we intersected in many ways throughout our career. But what I want to say and acknowledge today is that I wouldn't be who I am today if not for Joel. Because after my postdoc, which was a thoroughly forgettable experience, I didn't get a job. And my husband, Dan, was an assistant professor at Tufts, so I said, let's go to Boston. There's as many schools in Boston as in any city, so I'll try to get a job in Boston. So we went to Boston, and I decided, well, if I couldn't be a theoretical physicist, which was what my PhD said I could be a high school physics teacher. And I took courses in education, and I did student teaching in high school and thought this was going to be my career. But one day this was the academic year 70-71, about Christmas time, I just happened to meet Joel in Harvard Square. And Joel said, you know, theoretical physics is getting really interesting right now. You should come talk to us at Harvard. And I went and talked to him, and we wrote a paper together with Tom Applequist, which was actually the first calculation that showed that Steve Weinberg's theory of weak interactions, which is part of what we now call the standard model, was better than previous theories of weak interactions. It actually worked, which the previous ones didn't. So this was a turning point in theoretical physics. The paper's eminently forgotten because later people proved formally and correctly that the theory was what we call renormalizable and really worked. We just showed that it worked to the next level. And so the paper is no longer cited, but it was critical to me, to Steve Weinberg, to the theory. Steve Weinberg, when he told him our result, invited us to his home for sherry, which in Harvard in those days was what you did if things were important. And so I just want to acknowledge Joel's presence and enthusiasm drew me back into physics and into theoretical physics and made my career happen. So thank you, Joel.
Thank you. Do you want to speak? And then Risa, and then Tara? Yes? Okay.
My name is Stefano Profumo. I'm a professor of physics here at UC Santa Cruz and a colleague and friend and collaborator of Joel's. When I joined UC Santa Cruz as a junior faculty nearly 20 years ago, Joel and Nancy were the first to invite my wife Tesla and me to dinner. And it was 2007, and I still remember him mentioning that he and Nancy had been early financial supporters of a then obscure Democratic primary candidate named Barack Obama. There was Joel, always ahead of the curve. That evening, he also described academia as something like a monastery, where everyone is equal, and that was quite important for a starting junior professor, and everyone works together toward a higher purpose. Then, with a smile, he added that the physics department had a simple hiring rule. Quote, "We only hire the best, and we never hire assholes," end quote. And I've tried to live by that ever since. I've always aspired to be the kind of mentor Joel was, fiercely devoted to his students' success, inside academia and beyond, generous to colleagues and collaborators, relentlessly curious across a breathtaking range of science, and deeply passionate about the ideas themselves, their inner workings, their foundational mysteries. Joel will be deeply missed, but he lives on, loud and clear in every scholar fortunate enough to have known him. Thank you.
Okay, I will be very brief. I know we've all been here a while. I'm Risa Wexler. One of Joel's PhD students. I came to Santa Cruz 30 years ago. Hard for me to believe. Sandy mentioned earlier that Joel was not the easiest advisor. I don't actually remember him giving me any advice and very little direction. But what he did do is create an incredible intellectual atmosphere, curiosity, this just consistent passion for solving the most important problems that, still is with me every day, and a real passion for solving problems that are achievable now. And that, was also in collaboration with Sandy, George, and David, and many others here in the room, this passion for trying to solve the problems in front of us now, really understanding the core of what is going on, but in a way that is connected to the data and in a way that matters for our understanding of the universe. So that just consistent passion, deep knowledge, he really helped me think about both the universe and also how to do important science. So thank you.
I will also try to be very speedy. I could say an infinite number of things about how Nancy and Joel have impacted me in the course of my life. I got the very good fortune to be Samara's best friend at age 10. And I was the kid popping in and out of their house at all hours for all of high school and ever since. So I could just go on and on and on and on and on. The backstock of memories there is enormous. But what I really want to say is the thing that has changed my life probably the most, although, again, hard to say, is that Joel and Nancy have believed in me ever since I was a kid. And I think that's what so many people in this room feel. And I have a story, quick one. Samara and I were in a dance company together in high school. And it was a super formative experience for me. I was the president, and I did a good job with it. It was fun. Samara gave the nicest speech thanking me at the end of it that I'll always remember. But anyway, I went off to college, and I started a dance company in college. And Nancy and Joel gave me a check for $100. And I have felt guilty for the last 27 years because I never cashed it. Because ATMs used to take away your check and you'd never have it again. And it meant so much to me, the physical piece of paper. as a symbol of how much they believed in me. That I couldn't cash in. I still have it. I'm really sorry about your checkbook ledger. I've never told anybody. It's just sitting in a jewelry box in my house. And it, you know, again, like one of 10 million things I could say. But from the bottom of my heart, I will always, always be grateful for Joel believing in me, for Nancy believing in me, and I think all of us know that Joel believed in us as individuals, as us as a group, as us a community, and us as a species, to be able to do the right thing and to be able to make the right choices to do the right thing for the world. So anyway, thank you.
Are you speaking? Oh, wonderful. Okay, you, Doug, John. Okay.
My name is Julie. Oh, my name is Julie. Some of you know me. I was director of the Academic Senate. I knew Joel by way of our work together. We sat often across the table from each other in a room that some of you know well, especially George Blumenthal, room 315, McHenry Library. Spent many hours there, but the story I want to tell happened on September 18th, 2025, at an Emeriti luncheon. Joel and Nancy arrived. The table was very long. Nancy went to chat with my husband, George, who's also a physicist. So I went to say hello to Joel. Joel was wearing a beret. And I said, "You're looking very French today, Joel." And he smiled. And he looked over at Nancy, and sorry, I'm nervous. I said, I'm really getting to enjoy learning to know Nancy. Nancy and I are in a memoir writing group together. And Joel said, "I suppose you know our story by now." And I said, "Well, I know Nancy's version of it, but I don't know yours." And Joel smiled, and he said, "Julie, it's a good story." And then he turned and he looked over at Nancy chatting with George, and he turned back to me and he said, "No, it is a great story." Then he closed his eyes, and he was smiling. And I said, "Au revoir, Joel." He didn't know I was there anymore. I walked away, turned around. Joel's eyes were still closed. He was smiling. Joel was remembering you, Nancy. Thank you.
My name is Doug Otto. I was a friend of Joel's. We came to Stanford at the same time, him as a graduate student, me as an undergraduate. He was very involved with a program called SWAPSI, Stanford Workshops on Political and Social Issues, with Bob Jaffe and Joyce Kobayashi. And that was the beginning of a wonderful time in my life, not because I was involved, but because I got to know those three people. Bob, who, I guess it wasn't ironic, but was also valedictorian of his class at Princeton, and then came to Stanford and got his PhD in elementary particle theoretical physics under Sid Drell, and then went and taught at MIT for his career. I got to know Joel then, and as my wife will tell you, I collect people, good people, and Joel was as good as they come. Joel went to the Society of Fellows, and I went to New York, and while we were both on the East Coast, we spent a lot of time together. We hiked in the woods in Maine, we met together in Cambridge, and I just got to know Joel better that way. And then when Joel came back to California, I came back to California at about the same time, and we continued that friendship. We continued to see each other, to do things together, to get to know each other better, and there was never a better friend. I probably talked to Joel once a month. We visited with Nancy, and we went to the aquarium in Long Beach together, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm a trial lawyer, and that's kind of about winning. And what Joel taught me was the importance of winning in certain ways. His qualities, his ethical approach to things, they mentioned it, his smile, but just the person that he was instructive, and we will all, I'm sure, miss him, but he was a very special person in my life.
So if you're wondering what this strange jacket is, there are a few of them around the room. I'm Joel's Princeton classmate. Proud to have Samara as a Princetonian also. First thing that Samara said to me when she saw me today was, next year is my 25th reunion. I can't wait to get my 25th reunion blazer. So all Princetonians are crazy. Those of you who've ever been there know that. Just three short anecdotes, and I'll maybe let everyone have lunch at that point. One is, Joel affected me profoundly at Princeton. I don't think he ever knew that he had done that. I thought I was going to be a mathematician. I was in a class with Joel and one other person who's now an emeritus professor at UC Santa Barbara, and I had an epiphany, and I don't believe in epiphanies, but I had one, which was that I was not going to be a mathematician because he was so advanced relative to me that I understood that I did not, there's something going on in his brain organically that I did not have. So he did me a big favor because I might have continued trying to be a mathematician. Secondly, just a story from our graduation that some of you may know. Joel, as has been said many times, was our valedictorian. By the way, he never said in my presence that he was valedictorian. He was very happy to have other people say it, but he never said it. I mean, he never looked for praise like that. He gave a speech, of course. He was valedictorian. He gave the valedictory speech. And Robert Oppenheimer had received an advanced degree at Princeton that year at our graduation. This is 7 months before Oppenheimer died. He was very ill with cancer himself. And in the New York Times the next day, I see Samara and Nancy shaking their heads up and down, Oppenheimer, praised Joel enormously for what he spoke about, which was the responsibility of scientists in the public sphere. And that really, I think, informed what Joel became in his life, which was just as important as his physics. And his physics was important, but the role that he played in bringing science to government, especially, and into the public sphere, to me, as a non-physicist, was more important. And the last story I'll tell is that when Joel was ill, we wanted to give him, our class, the highest award that we give, something called the Locomotive Award. And we tried multiple times to do that, and he was too ill to come to Princeton. He was even too old to come to San Francisco at a certain point. I live in San Francisco, to receive that award. And finally, Nancy, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, you and he were going to be at Yale for something. And he said, I have to go to Yale. I think I could come to Princeton after that. I think I'm well enough to do that. He said, this came from my classmates. It matters more to me than all those other awards. Sorry. So I remember Joel the way that all of you do, as just a generous spirit, a wonderful guy, a funny guy. And not everybody appreciates that he's so funny, but he was very funny. And I'm very proud to be here. Thank you.
I'm going to close with an excerpt from a poem by Maya Angelou. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great souls die, after a period, peace blooms. Slowly and always irregularly, spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses, restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better. For they existed. Thank you. Us for lunch and a comical abundance of desserts at the reception right across the way. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're Leslie and Peter, and Joel was our brother-in-law, married to Peter's sister, Nancy. For me, what stands out about Joel is his incredible depth as a human being. You only had to watch him whipping up a meal with his wife or explaining to his grandson how to zest a lime to understand what a family man he was. He truly cared about people, always listened attentively, and took everyone seriously.
You know, I most remember Joel for his patience and his compassion, traits that made him a really gifted teacher. He could break down the most complex scientific concepts into something anyone could understand. In the almost 50 years I knew him, I never once saw Joel lose his temper. He was always calm and approachable in any situation. I'm a science fiction buff, and over the years I presented him with many futuristic scenarios. He would patiently explain why they were improbable, all in language I could understand. As smart as he was, he never made anyone feel less than or unenlightened.
To know who Joel was, all you have to do is look at the bumper sticker on his little white Prius. It's a quote from Anne Frank that reads, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world."
Hi, this is David Gould. I am Joel's, Primack's, first cousin. And I have known Joel since I was a baby. Joel was at my bar mitzvah. I was at his wedding with Nancy. And I was there the week that Samara was born, because and they would have been at my wedding, but she was being born at the same time. We went on our honeymoon, and then on the way back from the honeymoon, stopped in Santa Cruz and visited with all of them. I remember being at Joel's bar mitzvah, being at his graduation from Princeton. And the little story about that is that when Joel graduated high school and we were all at his high school graduation, he said something to my dad about, well, I don't know where exactly I'm going to go to college, but, you know, will you come and, you know, take the family with you? And my dad's response was, Joel, if you are the top dog, I will take everybody there. Okay, and Joel then called up some years later to say, okay, I'm graduating, I'm the top dog, and we were all there. And I'm gonna miss him. Hi.
Pascal and I met Joel and Nancy at the Senate in Paris. Joel was there to speak about cosmology, I was there to speak about galaxies. Something immediately connected us. Not long after, we came to Santa Cruz to live there for 2 years. We were welcomed as family. Our second son was born there, and in some sense, I was also reborn there. The person I am today would not exist without that encounter. I am French, you know, so to contradict is my second nature. I always start a discussion by saying yes, but, which often annoys my American colleagues, except Joel. Who always enjoyed debating with me, and I always felt that I was privileged to hear his insight. Today, people are amazed by ChatGPT. If only they knew Joel, they would understand the feeling to chat with a living encyclopedia, combined with an amazing intellectual finesse. I know the world keeps going on, even when the stars fade away, but I still struggle to accept it. Joel, we miss you. Pascal and I...
Greetings from Boston on a cold and snowy day when any sensible person would rather be in California. Sadly, I can't come to Santa Cruz on February 14th to join in this memorial to Joel, my old friend and collaborator. Joel and I did not know each other before we met 60 years ago at SLAC. Although we had followed curiously similar trajectories, from physics and valedictorians at Princeton to Sid Drell's group at SLAC. When we did meet in the fall of 1968, we discovered that we both felt passionately about the political crisis that was overwhelming America in those days. Soon we had launched a peculiar and seemingly quixotic project that marked the beginning for both of us of career-long efforts at the interface of physics and the wider world. Together with Joyce Kobayashi, then a Stanford undergraduate, Joel and I imagined and then created a program known by the unforgettable acronym SWAPSI, Stanford Workshops on Political and Social Issues. SWAPSI offered 4-credit workshops where Stanford students could research and then take action on critical issues of the day. SWAPSI was a success. It lasted over 2 decades and started many renowned activist scientists on their careers. Those were heady times. I guess we thought we could change the world. Joyce and Joel and I spent long days and longer nights brainstorming topics, creating course catalogs, writing grant proposals, and twisting the arms of distinguished senior faculty at Stanford to co-sponsor workshops that were actually run by young scientists such as Frank von Hippel and Ned Groth, who went on to distinguished careers as citizen scientists. Joel and I started as co-conspirators and quickly became good friends. Soon I learned that when Joel set his mind to something, he made it happen. One of the happiest moments I have of those days was backpacking with Joel in the Sierra Nevada. Together we scaled some modest peaks, and navigated a couple of seemingly endless boulder fields and made some gigantic blisters. I still carry Joel's voice in my head, reminding me to be prepared, to be passionate, and to work harder than anyone else. It is difficult to believe that he's no longer just an email away. His absence leaves the world a lesser place and leaves me deeply saddened. Thank you. Greetings.
Hi, I'm Paula Gutlove, and this is Gordon Thompson, and we're here to celebrate Joel's remarkable, wonderful life.
I first met Joel in the spring of '79. He was visiting Frank von Hippel at Princeton, and I learned that they had written this wonderful book together, Advise and Dissent. It's a great book, and I really enjoyed meeting Joel then, and I wanted to meet him again and had the great fortune to do so.
So I met Joel for the first time in Santa Cruz when Gordon and I were traveling, and Joel and Nancy invited us to dinner with them and Elise Boulding and Kenneth Boulding, peace activists, and we had a wonderful evening of interesting conversation and changing course and working on peace issues as opposed to the other things that we were working on. And Joel was sparkling in his excitement to share what he was doing, his latest endeavors, in his interest and enthusiasm to hear what other people were doing, and his great interest in discussing ideas and implementing them. And the next time we saw Joel and Nancy was a year later, 1980, in Oxford, England, when we had arranged for Joel to speak to a group of peace and environmental activists in a small house in Oxford. And there were about 40 of us crowded in, and Joel was giving a wonderful talk and about changing the paradigm. And I hear from the back of the room someone say, "Blimey, mate, what's a paradigm?" And then I saw Joel's remarkable patience and ability to teach and engage, and brought the whole room together on the need to change a paradigm in 1980 to achieve peace. So Joel,
we will miss you.
We miss you, and you made a remarkable contribution to our lives and to many lives. Thank you. Hi.
I first met Joel and Nancy on a bus in Istanbul. His first words to me were, "Are you from Berkeley?" I was shocked. How did he know? This was 1978, 79. They had just come back from a meeting on atomic energy in Bulgaria and were visiting Istanbul. Turned out we were staying at the same hotel, and our friendship grew and grew, and over the last 40 plus years, we've kept in touch as often as possible. Joel had a voracious need for knowledge. He was inquisitive about everything. He loved music, took great pride in his daughter, Samara, and his wife, Nancy, their accomplishments, and his love for knowledge reached the universe. We'll miss him dearly. Take care. Be well, Nancy and Samara. Know you are loved. Bye.
I'm so sorry I can't be with you today. I miss Joel greatly. He had a profound influence on me and my research. He and Nancy had much to do with bringing us to Santa Cruz, and again, I miss him a great deal.
Hey everyone, sorry I can't be there in person, but I wanted to pay my respects and express my gratitude for Joel.
Joel was an incredible advisor when I was doing my PhD in Santa Cruz. He was always very generous with his time and probably the most optimistic person that I've ever met. Joel was really good at coming up with impactful project ideas for his students, and the highlight of my own scientific career so far, I owe to Joel. We co-authored a paper with the whimsical title, Galaxies Going Bananas, which got a lot of media attention, and one of the things Joel said was, "See, banana slugs make great astronomers."
Dear Joel Primack friends and relatives, this is a message from the Aura Collaboration. It is hard for us to find words to express how grateful we are with Joel, that he was from the very beginning as one of the founders of the project till the very end, and he became the soul of the project, always supportive, always trusting that the science that we do is a very good science, and he was also providing mentorship to each one of us individuals. You can see many young faces here. All of them are somehow the legacy of Joel. All of them had very nice moments with Joel, getting advice from him and getting directions to move forward in their individual projects. But also the seniors, not only the ones that we are here, but also the ones that could not attend to the recording. We have been mentored with him at some point and also advised by him to, in the best way to move forward in the academy, in the hard times that we may have at some point during the academical career. Joel was always kind with all of us, always nice, with always nice words. And really, we are missing him a lot in our meetings now. I am always hoping to see him again appearing and providing some advice and in some of the plots or in some of the discussions that we are having. It's hard to not see him in our meetings now. And we are missing him a lot, both in the professional but also in the personal level. And also to Nancy, thank you a lot for these very nice evenings in your house, in these very personal moments with lots of very nice discussions. But not only in the Agora dinners, but also in personal moments like walking in the Redwood with you and Joel. We will miss that a lot, and we are very thankful for all of these very nice times we had with all of you. Thank you a lot.